A few years ago, I went on a tea tour of South Korea. The trip was organized by Yoon-hee Kim. This is Yoon-hee right here, who knows more about tea and specifically Korean tea than anyone else I know. Let me show you what I did day by day on this tea tour. On this 8-day trip, it was me, my friend and fellow tea sommelier Sarah, and a woman named Selena who I had never met. Sarah and I flew out together from New York and we landed in Seoul. Day one of the trip was spent entirely in Seoul. We had an intro to Korean tea session, and then we all went out to dinner at a restaurant that served temple food. This was my first time having temple food. Temple food is food eaten in Buddhist temples, and it's simple and clean. The day ended with tea from this old school style tea cafe. The next morning, day 2, we packed up our stuff and headed out to the train station to take the 4-hour train ride down south to where all the tea farms are. From here on out, Uni drove us around in a minivan. We stopped by a popular restaurant for lunch in a small town. Okay, let me just say that every single thing I ate on this trip was absolutely delicious. Korean food consists of rice that's served with the main dish and banchan, which are small side dishes. Each restaurant that we went to had so many banchans on the table that they barely fit. After lunch, we went to a traditional tea house where we had green teas and herbal tea with tea snacks. This was a huge highlight of the trip for me. It's a place I never would have found on my own. Everything from the tea to the tea snacks was perfect. We sat on cushions on the floor and we really enjoyed our time there. And this is the first tea farm on our trip. We walked through the fields and made coin tea at their tea factory. Coin tea is made by pounding and pressing the tea leaves into molds, then drying them out. The next day, which was day 3, we visited a large tea garden that's open to the public in Bosong. On the drive to our next stop, we saw tea farmers harvesting tea leaves using a mechanical cutter that trims off the top layer of the tea plant. By the way, I'm Korean, but I've never traveled much outside Seoul and have never been to any of the tea farms, so everything on this trip was new to me too. From there, we went to a pottery studio by the water and we had tea prepared by the artist. This was our lunch and the food was so good. We were stuffed after every meal. After lunch, we went to a tea research center to pick tea flowers to make tea flower infused alcohol. And that was followed by a lecture on the history of Korean tea by Yoon-hee. In the afternoon, we went to another tea farm. Surprise, surprise. On this tea farm, we rode on the open back of a small truck to tour the tea fields. What's so special about visiting tea farms is that you get to meet the tea makers, who will sit down with you and brew their teas for you to taste, and ultimately to buy. In the afternoon, we watched a traditional Korean dance. And here I am in a hanbok I tried on. At the end of the day, we were treated to a Korean barbecue, and dessert was sweets paired with powdered green tea, hand whisked by the owners of a tea farm. On our day 4, we moved on to another town and to another tea farm. We made these traditional tea sweets. Okay, what I found so interesting was our lunch this day. Before we got to the restaurant, a call was made letting them know that we would be ordering a whole chicken. At that point, a chicken is slaughtered, then cooked. Look how she opens up that bottle with just a spoon. After lunch, we went to a historical site, a 600-year-old home, and from there we went on a forest hike where we saw wild tea bushes. At this point, I was extremely tired since it was go, go, go nonstop. Did I have a meltdown? Yes. I learned on this trip that I really need a lot of downtime. On day 5, we visited a local tea potter studio. This is where I got a gorgeous tea set that reminds me of this trip every time I use it. Another big highlight was getting to ride this mini roller coaster, which is a small contraption that they use to carry tea leaves and equipment up and down the steep hills. It was so much fun, even though it moved 5 miles per hour. Here I am, living my best life. At the top of the hill, we had a tea tasting. The rest of the day into evening was spent at a wild tea museum, where we learned how the tea is processed by making our own tea. Tea is usually made by either pan frying or by steaming. And here, we pan fried it using these machines. Yoon-hee first showed us how to grab and scatter the tea leaves in the drum to pan fry them evenly. Then it was our turn. You can see the tea leaves here are fairly green when we start the process. We each had our own drum where we had to constantly move the tea leaves with our hands. The drums are basically giant woks, so we wore gloves and sleeves on our arms to make sure we didn't get any burns. After the initial turn on the heat, The tea leaves are rolled, all by hand. Everything is all manual, and my arms and hands were sore the next day. After the rolling, the tea is put back on the drum and moved around until it's dry. Take a look at the tea leaves here after the drying process. It looks really dry and crispy. This was at the end of the pan frying, and the tea leaves are being removed from heat. Soon after, we got to drink our finished product. What we made was a green tea. On day 6, we started out with a visit to an artisanal farm where we had tea made by the tea maker. Every tea farm we went to had a tea room where buyers could go to taste the tea, and we were always served tea snacks to go with the tea. In the afternoon, we had a private lesson on Korean tea ceremony. We were shown step by step how to perform the tea ritual by an instructor. Then one by one, we each went up to try it. She made it look so easy, but there were so many steps that it's something you have to practice all the time to get it right. After the tea ceremony instruction, we went to a small tea farm, which of course meant a tea tasting with the tea master. Growing up, I drank a lot of roasted barley and roasted corn tea, so I always prefer roasted teas. And his tea farm had an amazing roasted green tea. On day 7, we went to a Buddhist temple that has strong ties to Yunhee. The temple is the home of Buddhist nun Jeongwan Snim, who has appeared on Netflix Chef's Table, and she and Yunhee are close friends. Yunhee travels often as her translator. The Buddhist nun wasn't there at the time of our visit, but we were treated to temple food and a private tour of the grounds, which included the sleeping quarters for the Buddhists and the kitchen where all the food is prepared. If you ever want to stay in a Buddhist temple, you can. They have overnight stays and temple food cooking classes that you can take. This applies to multiple temples all around Korea. My favorite time to go to Korea is in the fall. I'm happy to say I got to eat a lot of persimmons on this trip. Before dinner, we went to another tea house where Yoonhee gave us more instruction on the art of Korean tea ceremony. Day 7 was our last day in the tea farm region. We had a delicious dinner before heading back up to Seoul. Day 8 was our last day of this tea tour, and we spent the day in Seoul, visiting markets with food stalls where we had lunch at one of the counters. It was November in Seoul, so it was so warming and comforting to have noodle soup. Before the day ended, Yoonhee showed us how to make this dried persimmon and walnut tea snack. You cut open and flatten the dried persimmon, then roll in walnut pieces. It's savory and sweet in one bite and goes great with green tea. Try making it yourself. It's super easy to make. The final stop was a tea house where we said our goodbyes. As exhausting as this trip was, I'm so grateful I was able to go, even with my meltdown. This is a trip no one else will be able to recreate. If anyone is watching this till the end, thank you. It took me 4 days to put this video together, so I hope you like it.